At one point, it kind of felt overwhelming to me because there were so many ways that people were saying, this is how to write a novel, from plotting to pantsing to outlining to snowflake method, how many acts you have in your novel, software to use, all that stuff. And then at one point, I just had to pick a way that was going to work for me. And so that's my main advice, is to just don't worry about trying to learn 5 or 6 methods of writing a novel. Maybe learn about it, but don't try to do them all, and then pick one way that works for you. And then the second one is, I think,
some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast. So, picture this. You're on a luxury cruise ship miles from shore when a medical emergency strikes. Now, imagine that the person handling the crisis has spent years in emergency rooms making life or death decisions and teaching the next generation of doctors. But the twist is that they've also just written a thriller that turns the very scenario into a heart-pounding page-turner. Welcome to the Authors on Mission podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of writers who don't just craft stories, they live them. Our guest today is Dr. Kevin Hwang, a professor of internal medicine who recently made the leap from examining rooms into the world of fiction with his debut novel, The Regression Strain. It's going to be an exciting podcast episode for everyone today. Without further ado, welcome, Dr. Hwang.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on, Danielle. I'm excited to talk more about my book and to help the readers get interested in this whole world here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around, because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, yeah, it's going to be a very exciting episode. So I'm wondering, if the very obvious question, I think, for everybody here, what made you take the leap from medicine to writing? Was there a certain pivotal moment that inspired the transition?
Yeah, well, I guess it's not a complete transition as in done with one and doing only the other. So I'm still doing medicine, but it did take a lot of change in the way I spend my time and when I decided to actually try to write a novel. I'd always wanted to do that for a long time, probably since I was a teenager, but I really didn't have the knowledge or the training to really know how to take that first step. I mean, I tried to write a few first chapters and it just fizzled out and everything. So I think what happened was that I started seeing that there were resources online that where I could learn from. So I thought that maybe I could learn the craft, but then I also needed an interesting story. And for a while, I wasn't really interested in writing about doctor characters. And then I kind of took the advice that everyone gives out, which is, write what you know. And so I thought that that was probably a good idea. And around that time, we were going on cruises as a family. And something just struck me where, boy, it's kind of a very interesting setting, and there might be a story in there. So I just started thinking about it.
Yeah, that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you too, is like, why a cruise ship? Because it's usually such a peaceful, happy vacation, but, you are right in the fact that it's a unique setting, something that's not as typical in the novel world. So it's really cool that you did that. I'm wondering then, you said you were inspired because you were on a cruise. Was there a specific, event that inspired you in particular, or did it just kind of come naturally from just being on the cruise?
Well, I mean, I was really trying to figure out what story could come out of a cruise setting. So there wasn't a specific event, but I was thinking about what would be the advantages of setting a story on a cruise ship. Well, for me as a writer, it would be an environment that I felt like I could kind of describe. I could do research, I could go from my own experience, and it was pretty interesting, and I could get a handle of it. And then it adds a little bit of a locked room mystery element to it, but it's not, like this classic, old style murder mysteries where they find a body and everyone's locked up in this country estate until the Agatha Christie or whoever solves the murder. It has that kind of element to it, but a setting where it's hard to escape. And then there's also a journey element to it too. The ship is sailing across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, for the example, in my particular book. So it's not just a mansion in the countryside. It's going from one place to another place to another, and it's supposed to arrive at a destination. So it's kind of a unique setting in that way. And there's also a time element. The cruise ship is supposed to arrive in New York by XYZ date. And does it do that? And in what shape does it arrive in? So, I think setting on a cruise ship, it was easy to kind of build the tension with all of those elements.
Yeah, you really did consider every factor in there, and really cool about the traveling aspect too, because then you can kind of change the different settings as they go to different places on the ship, which is really cool to think about. So moving into kind of, more of the story, some character development, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your protagonists and what exactly made them uniquely suited to handle the crisis on the ship. I'm assuming it's some of your own experiences, but what development went into the characters in the book?
That's a really good question. So he is a doctor. They have doctors and nurses on cruise ships in real life. So that was not a stretch, but I wanted to write about a doctor who was really struggling with a lot of things and felt more like an everyman character rather than some super know-it-all, cocky type of hero. He's kind of on the younger side for being a doctor. He's only a couple of years out from his family medicine residency. And so he knows a lot about medicine, but he also has basically some of the self-doubts that doctors have in real life about many things. It's a tough profession. So I wanted to cast him as that type of person. I've never worked as a doctor on a cruise ship. I've been to the medical center on a cruise ship, but I've never worked as one. And so I did have to do a lot of research about some specific things about how they do medicine on the cruise ship. But, and I drew it from my experience, obviously, but there wasn't any direct one-to-one correlation with a specific event that happened to me or any of my patients that I wrote about in the book. But it's just drawing on experiences and putting together characters and situations.
Understood, right. So like a little bit of realism, but mainly some creativity and a lot of research, as you mentioned, research what it would be like to actually work on a cruise ship. I'm wondering
Yeah.
what the research process was like because, as an author myself and for the authors listening to this podcast today, we always like to learn about different research strategies. How do we build up the worlds that our characters are in? What was that like for you? What was your process?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So, with YouTube, you can find, people talking about almost anything these days. And so I think, my strategy was to watch a lot of videos of actual doctors or nurses who had worked on cruise ships, and they'll post videos. They're doing, I don't know, I can't remember if they were doing Instagram or whatever, but they would post videos of their own, day in the life of. So I watched a lot of them. And even in there's a lot of variability in the experiences that they were describing based on different cruise lines they were in or what journeys they were on. So I kind of felt comfortable that eventually got an idea of the general aspects of cruise medicine. I didn't have to worry about getting a lot of details to fit exactly what I saw online because I kind of had a range that I could go through. I looked up on a lot of forums. So on cruise, there's a lot of forums that passengers or prospective passengers will post their questions on. They're worried about, can I bring my medicine? Things like that. And so I just trying to get an idea of the answers that were provided in those forums. When people ask, other folks would answer and provide their own experiences. So I learned a lot there. And then one aspect of research that I had to do was at the very end, there's a scene set in New York. And I've been to New York City, I've been to Manhattan, but I don't live there. It's a short scene. I wanted to get it right. So I used Google Earth and Street Maps,
Wow.
just to take that camera through and just make sure that I wasn't making any egregious mistakes. And then in general for the setting, I think I tried to do it for the book where I wasn't overloading the reader and the pages with tons of extraneous detail about the setting. I just wanted to kind of paint the picture and just kind of set the mood and have a few details in there and not describe things in excruciating detail.
Right. Well, hey, that's really cool. I love the Google Earth idea too. That's always something to
Yeah,
think about. As somebody who travels a lot and writes during my travels, I'm sometimes inspired by places I'm in, but not everybody can go and see what it's actually like in these places, especially New York, right? So, really
yeah.
cool. Very good idea. So, all this being said, I'm wondering if we can transition a little bit into, sort of the journey of getting this published. I mean, you chose to self-publish rather than, pursue traditional publishing. So what led to that decision? Did you encounter any surprises along the way? What was that like for you?
Well, I actually did try to get this traditionally published. I gave myself a timeline. When it was ready, I said, I think I would regret not trying. So I did query a few agents and I got some promising, requests for manuscripts and feedback, but ultimately I didn't get a deal. And then just after a few months, I was satisfied with kind of learning and kind of going through that experience. And I didn't want to keep trying for another year or so, as many authors do, or even longer than that. So I was ready to pivot to self-publishing pretty quickly. Been already doing some research on that. And in genres like thrillers, it's a pretty common thing these days. So, you know, I learned a lot. I do enjoy the autonomy that I can have as a self-publisher. But when I mean autonomy, I mean I can make decisions, but it doesn't mean I do everything myself. So, I hired out the cover design to a great group called Demonza out of New Zealand. And they
Oh,
do, pro level cover design for major publishers and indie authors like myself. They do great work. So, and also hired them out for the interior formatting. And of course, I worked with several editors, developmental editor, Lisa Poisson. She worked with me closely on, uh, guiding me through elements related to story structure and pacing and things like that. So, yeah, it's self-publishing, but self doesn't mean alone. At least it wasn't my experience. I had the help of a lot of people, beta readers, things like that. And I put it on Amazon KDP. That's where it is right now as of July, and they make it very easy to. The barrier of entry is pretty low. You can get a product up there. Now, whether it is seen by anybody has to do with how much marketing I'm gonna, that I'm putting into it, because there's a lot
mhm.
of books out there. So I'm working on that part of it. It's been enjoyable. I can decide where and when to promote it, change things if I want, change things on my Amazon listing. So I like that. I'm really happy I went down this route.
Yeah, when it comes to traditional versus self-publishing, there's lots of pros and cons, but for you, it seems like it really just worked out the way it was meant to, because here it is now, it's on Amazon, and people can still read it and enjoy it. But I also love the point that you made about how it is collaborative. You've reached out to a cover designer, a developmental editor. People do think that writing is just a, one person job, but it's not. You need to really, you know, get in touch with others, get their feedback. That's what makes your book so great.
Oh yeah, I mean yeah, the editors and the coaching, and then I work with a copy editor off that I contacted through Reedsy, and then also a proofreader. I was part of a couple of writing groups. One of them was actually at my school where I work. I work at a medical school in Houston, and so they have actually a center for humanities and ethics. And I think more and more kind of academic medical centers are developing the same types of offerings, but mine actually offered a series of workshops that we could go through. And it came along at just the right time because I'd put my novel down probably for several months and wasn't doing anything on it. And when
Mm,
I signed up for this, it eventually was my turn to submit my own work for feedback and discussion. And so that forced me to kind of polish things up and get it out there. And once I, received some kind of encouragement and feedback from my peers in that center, I decided to really pick it up again and to continue moving forward. The self-publishing thing also, it happens a lot quicker. I wanted to get the story out there, but there was also a lot of waiting to do. Like I did when I'm waiting for the editor to come back with comments. That can be a little bit tough, but it's something we all have to learn if we're going to get really good help in our writing
100%.
processes.
Yeah, no, those are all really good points. So, do you happen to have a copy of the book with you today?
Yeah, let's see. I have a right behind. I can reach back and get the hardback. which is the
Yeah,
same
I
size,
always like to give people a chance to show off the cover because it's so, you were mentioning
let's
that
see.
you had that designer create it. And yeah, that is
Yeah.
a really beautiful cover. I love it. Is that the
Yeah.
right? Okay, yeah, I did see this when I
Yeah.
was looking up the book. So it's kind of like the shadow of a person, and then we have there's the planet Earth or the
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and there's a ship in there, and it's I love the cover they did. We did have to go back and forth on something, and initially, just as their first draft, they got it almost exactly what I wanted, but the water was a little bit calm and sedate, and so I said, well, this is kind of an intense story. I want rough seas out there, and so I said, hey, make the ocean a little bit rougher, and they came back and had it exactly what I wanted.
Right, well, hey, I love that. And it's always good to have it exactly what you're looking for, promote the book, and really, get a good idea of what the book's about is what I'm trying to say. So that's great. So
Yeah.
now, moving forward from that, you did mention that you're working on a second novel with the same protagonist. So I'm wondering if you want to shine a little bit of light on that. What excites you most about returning into the writing world?
Well, I never set out to write a series because I just wanted to write the first book and feel like I did a decent job and then see what would happen after that. But as I started the self-publishing process, getting feedback, people, did like the protagonist. So I felt good that maybe they would follow the protagonist through a second story, even if it wasn't the same conflict. It wasn't an extension of the same conflict of the first story. Like the first story, the book that's out there, the Regression Strain, that's self-contained. The story's over. There's no, it's not a cliffhanger. But I started thinking about it. It leads directly into, well, what would Dr. Peter Palma do afterwards? And I think the most interesting part is what kind of person he is now after having gone through all the stuff on the cruise ship. And without giving away spoilers, he has changed a lot and for better and for worse. He's a different doctor, he's more capable, but he's also got some things he has to deal with that are real challenges. So he's changed like physiologically and mentally and psychologically. So I think he's well posed to take on additional conflict. And so that's what I'm working on right now. I've just started it. I'm just drafting that second novel, and it'll probably take a while before I get it out there. We'll see, maybe a year and a half or so. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, hey, we could all be on the lookout for it, and there's never a rush. It's always about, what works best for you, and when the ideas flow and all that. We know it is a process, especially with working with so many different people, as we talked about. You need to be ready for setbacks and the road. So, yeah, that's a great timeline. I'm wondering,
Yeah.
if people want to stay up to date with your progress on it, and maybe perhaps reach out, comments on the book, that sort of thing, stay connected in general. What's the best way to do so? How can we get in touch?
Well, the central point of contact would be my website, and that's just my first and last name. So it's kevinhwang.com. It's KevinHwang.com. And that has more about me in the book and some links to my socials and the web page, the Amazon site where it's on sale right now, Goodreads and things like that. And there's a sign up for the newsletter, and so that's the best place.
Hey, that's awesome. Okay, so everyone, we're going to put the link to the description box, the link to that in the description box of the podcast today, so you can go ahead and click on over and get connected. So perfect stuff. Now,
Great.
as we begin to sort of wrap up a little bit today, I'm wondering if you happen to have any bits of advice that you'd like to leave our listeners with today. Anything in the writing world that perhaps you wish you'd known that you now know after writing your book.
Yeah, I mentioned before that there's tons of writing advice and systems and processes out there that you can learn about. And at one point, it kind of felt overwhelming to me because there were so many ways that people were saying, this is how to write a novel, from plotting to pantsing to outlining to snowflake method, how many acts you have in your novel, software to use, all that stuff. And then at one point, I just had to pick a way that was going to work for me. And so that's my main advice is to just don't worry about trying to learn 5 or 6 methods of writing a novel. Maybe learn about it, but don't try to do them all. And then pick one way that works for you. And then the second one is I think it was key for me to figure out how to interpret feedback and when to seek it. I think that getting the right type of feedback at the right time was important to me. And so uh, getting feedback too early tended to just make me doubt the story that I was writing, like doubt if I was doing it the right way, because people just had different opinions. I think I just needed to stick to something that I thought was going to work and get feedback at a later stage from a smaller group of folks. Otherwise, I'd never really get something down. I'd never really complete a draft. So I think those are the two things. And I agree with what you're saying, Danielle, about everyone has their own timeline. Once I was done with it, I definitely want to get it out there. But in terms of trying to finish it, I never felt a huge rush. I knew it was going to take a long time, and I was fine with it. And I knew what I could balance in my life, and I just kept plugging away when I had the time to do it.
Of course. Yeah, those are all some really great tips. You made some wonderful points. You have to do what's best for you. Don't worry about perfecting every writing strategy out there. Just find one that matches your book and your style. And exactly that. You need to find a time that works for you too. Get it right and be happy with it before just rushing it. So amazing
Yeah.
stuff. I really appreciate all of these tips. This has been a really insightful conversation. I think it's really great to kind of dive into the thriller world and learn a little bit about how you've created this. The whole series on a cruise ship too is amazing to think about. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you
It's
coming
great.
on. And for everybody listening, just remember the best stories often come with the lives you're already living. Write what you know. So whether you're a healthcare professional, an engineer, a teacher, or whatever field you're working in, you also have the unique experience and perspectives that the world needs to hear. Dr. Hwang's story reminds us that the expertise in one area doesn't limit us. It always enhances our ability to tell authentic, compelling stories in others. The question isn't whether you have something worth sharing, but whether you'll take the first step to share it. Thank you so much for joining us on the Authors on Mission podcast today. Until next time, keep writing, keep creating, and keep pursuing those missions that set your soul on fire. We'll see you next time, everybody.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.